This empire was invincible, even to the strongest knights who withered before its enormous onslaught. I personally have a certain sympathy for what happened then, for I cannot forget that it was at this time that the beginning of nearly 500 years of occupation by the Turks of our own country, of the Serbian nation, had begun. This was after the famous Battle of Kosovo, where the Serbian army, greatly outnumbered, was defeated, not, however, before inflicting most terrible losses on the Turks. A situation which I think you here in this country will compare undoubtedly to your own great battle of Gallipoli in 1915. Those Serbs that did not die were less fortunate than possibly those of the knights, since they had to remain and be subjected to the occupation and accept whatever treatment was meted out by their masters, who had very little reason or inclination to respect the rights of a Christian people. One must nevertheless take into account that the losses resulting from the Crusades were not sustained by one side only. Then in the 16th century, the knights again were besieged, this time on the island of Rhodes, which they had to vacate after their capitulation in the year of 1522, on terms that were really exceedingly mild and lenient. In any case, this caused them to move for the first time onto the island of Malta, which they set about fortifying and began to build for the first time their navy. Both of these actions were shown to be of a most prudent nature and stood them in particularly good stead, because once again the forces of the Turkish Ottoman Empire attacked, but this time failed, and the attackers were repulsed. For the next period, the fortunes of the order fluctuated up and down, and on several and many occasions, one might say, sorely taxed the loyalty of the knights themselves, who found that they were in the service of monarchs, who attacked very often the navy of the country in which they were situated. This would then indicate that not only were the knights employed in defending themselves, but also were hired out in what one might term a mercenary force. Now, one of the very main important factors that was supporting the order at that time was that they used to receive an enormous amount of their revenues from lands that were not, obviously, in Malta. And it was on the rulers of these particular lands, particularly from France, who had looked rather in a jaundiced way on this enormous flow of wealth that was to go out of their own country to the order. And among those that produced the greatest amount of this wealth and flow of goods and the rest of it was from France, which gradually, as their revolution came closer and closer, so the flow of wealth became smaller and smaller until eventually it ceased altogether. Then later, in the year of 1798, the greatest blow probably to the order came when Napoleon arrived on the shores of Malta and demanded to be let into the harbor. Once he set foot on the island, he began a complete reorganization. He abolished the local nobility, destroyed most of the examples of the pre-revolutionary system, looted houses, and removed all the material wealth from the order's establishments. And despite an uprising after Napoleon's departure to the Middle East, the fortunes of the order changed very little. What happened was in fact the following. The siege that was laid by the Maltese on the French garrisons, which resulted in a standoff until the British forced the French to capitulate. This caused an interesting situation where various entities all claimed the right to the island. Firstly, the Maltese themselves, who initially mounted the siege, wanted some say in the future of their own country. The British, on the other hand, had no wish to see the French return back again to the island, an island that was situated so strategically in the Mediterranean. The Kingdom of Two Sicilies, which had provided material and manpower for the original siege, claimed the island for itself also. The order, which was now scattered by Napoleon, felt it too had a right to Malta. It had, after all, been on the island for some 200 years. This claim, incidentally, was supported by Russia, who had accepted a largish number of the knights. The importance of this you will see in a minute. The British, however, had a simpler and typical, I think, of the British, a more pragmatic approach to the whole problem. This was that it was they who had, after all, accepted the surrender of the French, who in turn had held the island by the right of conquest. And so they, the British, were now de facto the rulers of Malta. The order now consisted of a number of scattered langs or priories. Two of these were in Russia, one a Catholic one and the other an Orthodox priory, while in Europe there remained further langs or a number of priories which existed without much cohesion between themselves. Now, at this time, and up until the year of 1815, the fortunes of the order reached their very lowest level, and without much hope of ever returning to Malta, and very little say in its future. This say lay mostly at the mercy of the relations between the powers of the time, which included Britain, Russia, the various German states, Austria, France, and the Holy See. The latter now nominated a new Grand Master of the order, and one that caused considerable amount of disagreement, so much so that the two Russian priories had threatened to sever all relations with the main body of the order as it was then. This added already to the serious troubles existing, threatening the very, very existence of the order altogether, and which prompted Napoleon at the time to officially announce that, officially to announce that, in his opinion, the order was non-existent. Then in 1850, the Pope took over what remained of the order under his protection and formed what has now emerged, and is today the most respected sovereign military order of Malta, or what is sometimes referred to as the Papal or the Roman Catholic Order of St. John. At the same time in England, there existed an English lang, and about which there was some question as to its title. Without going into too long a detail about all this, the matter was settled by Queen Victoria, who in May of 1888 gave this group, or lang, her royal charter and constitution. From that day on, I need hardly tell you of the enormous contribution that this relatively young order has made with its famous, world-famous organizations of the St. John's Ambulance Association and the Ambulance Brigade, both of whom were incidentally initiated before the charter was given in respectively 77 and I think in 87.